The past year has been nothing short of a whirlwind, filled with ups and downs, family drama, personal growth, and unexpected surprises. Looking back, it's hard to believe how much has changed in such a short time. For better or worse, life has continued to evolve, and it's become clear that we're all moving forward in our own ways. Here's an update on everything that's happened, from the highs to the lows. As the holidays approach, I find myself feeling incredibly grateful for the love and support of my family. We've had our share of challenges, but this time of year always brings us closer together. Last year, we made the decision to spend the holidays as a family and even planned to travel together. It was the first time in a long while that we could all come together without any serious drama. Of course, there were the usual moments of awkwardness, but overall, it was a peaceful and heartwarming time. Joe, as always, was the one who kept the holiday spirit alive. He insisted on making everything perfect for us. One of the highlights of the season was him preparing Christmas baskets for everyone. He made sure that each of us got exactly what we wanted, and even went above and beyond by adding bottles of wine to the baskets. We all knew that it was his way of spreading joy, and it worked. Everyone was thrilled with their gifts. It's these little touches that make Joe such a special part of our lives. But not everything was smooth sailing. As much as I loved the holiday season, there was a lingering sense of uncertainty hanging over us. I had told Sam about the new paint colors I had chosen for the house, hoping he would be excited about the changes. But to my surprise, Sam wasn't interested in living there anymore. It became clear that he was ready to move on from the family home. He mentioned that he planned to rent the house out instead, which was a bit of a shock, but I understood where he was coming from. It had been a lot to take in, especially after everything we'd been through as a family. He needed space to grow and heal, and I respected that. In an attempt to lighten the mood, I jokingly mentioned the possibility of eloping to avoid any wedding drama. As much as I thought it was a funny idea, Joe immediately shut it down. He told me, in no uncertain terms, that if I chose to get married, I would get the biggest party ever. His enthusiasm was infectious, and it made me smile. I realized that no matter how crazy things got, Joe would always have my back.
He was still the best.
While the holidays were relatively peaceful, the year had been anything but easy for some members of our family. I can't say it was entirely drama-free. Far from it, actually. Daniela, in particular, had been causing a lot of tension in the family. After everything that had happened between us, I didn't expect much to change with her, but I still hoped she would eventually come around. Unfortunately, it seemed like she was determined to stir up trouble. She had been trying to paint us as the bad guys to anyone who would listen, and her latest attempt at causing drama was no different. Her sisters had accused us of being horrible, making the situation even worse. However, when Anna sent out an email addressing the situation, no one bought into her narrative anymore. It seemed like everyone was finally seeing through her manipulation. One of Daniela's sisters even had a dramatic fallout with her boyfriend because he didn't want to be associated with such a toxic family. It was a painful situation, but at least we knew we were doing the right thing by distancing ourselves. As much as I wish things were different, I knew that cutting off contact with Daniela was the only way to protect myself and my loved ones from her toxic behavior. She had tried to force her way back into our lives repeatedly, but we were resolute in our decision to keep our distance. There was no turning back. As for our father, his feelings about all of this were complicated. He had always tried to keep the peace, but there were times when even he couldn't ignore the damage Daniela had caused. While he still cared about her in his own way, he made it clear that he would no longer allow her to bring negativity into our family dynamic. It was tough, but we all knew it was necessary. Amidst all the chaos, one of the few bright spots this year was Sam's progress. For so long, he had been stuck in a cycle of uncertainty, but things were starting to turn around. He had taken time off work to focus on himself and his well-being, which was a huge step forward. His boss, who had been incredibly understanding throughout his struggles, reassured him that his job would still be there when he was ready to come back. It was clear that Sam was in a better place mentally and emotionally, and that made me feel optimistic about his future. Sam was also getting back to his old, goofy self. He started running again, something he hadn't done in a while, and he even announced that he was planning to run a marathon next year. It was great to see him finding joy in the little things again. In a way, I think the marathon was more than just a physical challenge. It was a symbol of his determination to move forward with his life. At the same time, Sam had also been helping Dad with some renovations at the house. The two of them were working on painting rooms and creating murals, and it was clear they were having a blast. As silly as the projects might have seemed, it was these small moments of bonding that helped Sam heal. They were making memories together, and that was what mattered most. The biggest personal update, of course, is that I'm now engaged. It had been months in the making, but when I made that offhand joke about eloping, I had no idea it would spark a flurry of activity behind the scenes. To my surprise, my future husband, Matt, had been planning the proposal for quite some time. He had even spoken to Sam about it beforehand, not wanting to make him uncomfortable by springing it on him. Sam had already known about the proposal plans, and as awkward as it was, he said it would be even more uncomfortable if Matt didn't ask for his blessing. Matt had also spoken with Joe and my dad. The conversation with my dad was particularly memorable. When Matt asked for my hand in marriage, my dad made him sweat. He played it cool, telling Matt that it wasn't his to give, but it was all in good fun. In the end, Matt proposed, and I couldn't have been happier. It was a moment I'll cherish forever. As thrilled as I was about the engagement, it was clear that my dad was even more excited than I was. He made it known that he wanted to walk me down the aisle, even if we ended up having a civil ceremony. It was a beautiful moment, and I couldn't help but feel overwhelmed with love and gratitude. On the family front, perhaps the most heartwarming news came from Joe and Anna. After months of waiting, they were finally matched with a baby. The baby, a sweet little girl, was officially theirs, and the adoption had been finalized. We had all known they were hoping to adopt for a long time, but when the news came through, it still felt surreal. There were tears, happy tears, shed as we celebrated their growing family. Dad, in particular, was overjoyed. He had embraced the idea of being a grandparent with open arms, and now, with the addition of his first grandchild, he was in full grandpa mode. It was heartwarming to see him so happy, and it was clear that this little one would be surrounded by love. Unfortunately, the news wasn't all good. Our estranged mother found out about the baby and demanded an introduction. It was something we had all anticipated, but it didn't make it any easier. In response, we had to take legal precautions to protect our family. Our version of an order of protection was put in place to prevent her from seeing the baby. We were resolute in keeping her out of our lives, and the last thing we wanted was for her to have any access to the child. As the year came to a close, I reflected on everything we had been through. There had been challenges, of course, but there had also been so much growth. We were all finding our own paths, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like we were finally healing as a family. The good had far outweighed the bad, and despite the drama that occasionally cropped up, I was incredibly grateful for the support and love we all shared. Looking ahead, there were still many unknowns. Sam had his own plans, and Matt and I were beginning to plan our wedding. It was going to be a busy and exciting time, but I knew that whatever happened, we would face it together as a family. As the year turned, the holiday glow began to fade, and with it came the harsh realities of the family dynamics we were all navigating. It was clear that we were at a crossroads, each of us moving in different directions, but still somehow tethered together by blood, history, and the weight of our shared experiences. Despite the promise of growth and new opportunities, there was still the ever-present tug of unresolved emotions and past wounds. The year ahead seemed filled with potential, but it also carried the burden of expectations. For me, it was a year of personal milestones, getting engaged, planning for the future, and rethinking what family meant. But the shadows of the past were never far behind, creeping into the present, influencing how we moved forward. There was no denying that the story of the past year wasn't just about new beginnings. It was also about confronting old struggles and finding a way to heal, even when healing seemed impossible. Sam's journey had been a central part of this transition. As I mentioned before, he had taken some time off work to focus on his well-being, and while we had seen glimpses of progress, I was still unsure about the full extent of his recovery. He was getting better, yes, but the scars from his struggles were still visible. I had always known him as the life of the party, the one with the jokes and the easy smile. But in the past year, he had begun to show a more serious side of himself, one that was willing to face the difficult truths he had been running from for so long. I watched him closely as he began to open up about the things that had weighed heavily on him. His mental health had been a quiet battle for years, and I had only started to realize the toll it had taken on him. Sam had always been good at hiding his pain behind a facade of humor and carefreeness. But over the last few months, he had begun to peel back those layers, showing a side of himself that was more vulnerable, more honest. We spent hours talking late into the night, discussing everything from our childhood to our parents' marriage and the tension between us and Daniela. It was painful at times, but it also felt like the first real conversations we had ever had about the things that had truly affected us. The walls that had once separated us seemed to be crumbling, and I realized how much we had both needed these conversations to heal. One of the most touching moments came when Sam shared a memory that had haunted him for years. It was about our mother, and it was clear that her absence from his life was still a deep wound. He He admitted that, despite everything she had done, he had always wanted her approval, her love. The revelation was heart-wrenching, and it opened my eyes to the depth of his internal struggle. For years, I had been so focused on my own pain and frustrations with our family, I hadn't fully understood the impact it had on him. Yet, despite the pain, Sam was determined to find a way forward. His decision to run a marathon was more than just a physical challenge. It was symbolic of his personal commitment to push through the difficulties that had held him back. He was learning to set boundaries, to say no when necessary, and to prioritize his well-being. For the first time in a long while, I could see the spark of hope in his eyes. Amidst all the personal challenges, there was one story that continued to fill us with hope and joy: Joe and Anna's journey to parenthood. After years of trying to conceive, they had made the decision to adopt, and the long wait had finally come to an end. The news came one sunny afternoon when Joe called me in a state of excitement that I had never heard before. He and Anna had been officially matched with a baby girl, and they were about to become parents. The emotional weight of that moment was overwhelming, and I couldn't help but tear up as I shared in their joy. Joe had always been the kind of person who would do anything for his family. His loyalty, kindness, and determination were some of his defining traits. But I had never seen him quite like this. His protective nature kicking into overdrive, his joy so evident it was contagious. And Anna, who had been so nervous about the process, was glowing with happiness and relief. It was clear that this baby was the answer to years of longing and hoping, and as we gathered to celebrate, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride in the family we had built. But as with anything in life, the journey wasn't without its complications. Our estranged mother, ever the troublemaker, found out about the adoption and demanded to meet the baby. That was a whole new chapter of stress and uncertainty that none of us had expected. We knew that our mother was a wild card, capable of unpredictable and often harmful behavior, and the thought of her trying to insert herself into the lives of Joe and Anna's new family was terrifying. We were not about to let that happen. Dad, ever the diplomat, tried to reason with her, but she refused to understand the boundaries we had set. The decision was made that we would need to take legal action to protect the new family. The process was complicated, and it caused a great deal of tension among us, but we all agreed it was necessary. There was no room for her toxicity in Joe and Anna's life, and certainly no room for her to influence the child they had fought so hard to bring into their home. As difficult as it was to take such drastic measures, it was a reminder of how far we had come as a family. We were no longer bound by the chains of enabling dysfunction. We were taking control of our lives, setting healthy boundaries, and ensuring that our children, our future, would be protected from the same mistakes and pain that had marked our past. As for me, the engagement was the beginning of an entirely new journey. The excitement of saying yes was still fresh, but the reality of wedding planning began to sink in with a mix of joy and overwhelming stress. Matt and I had always dreamed of a simple ceremony, something intimate that reflected our personalities. But as the months passed, the pressure to have the perfect wedding mounted, and the conversations around the wedding started to become complicated. My dad, ever the romantic, was determined to give me the fairy tale wedding he had always dreamed of for me. His enthusiasm, while endearing, was sometimes overwhelming. He envisioned a big, elaborate celebration, complete with the grand entrance and the stunning venue. As much as I loved him, I couldn't help but feel the weight of his expectations. I had always been someone who preferred understated elegance, but the idea of pleasing everyone started to feel like an impossible task. Matt, for his part, was the calming influence. He kept reminding me that the wedding was about us, not about appeasing everyone else's wishes. But navigating the balance between what I wanted, what my dad wanted, and what was financially feasible was a challenge. It was also becoming apparent that there was tension between my family and Matt's, each side having its own vision for what the wedding should look like. It was clear that compromise would be key, but finding common ground wasn't always easy. Through it all, Matt's support was unwavering. He stood by me as we worked through the logistics, making decisions together, even when I was unsure of what I wanted. He helped me realize that the most important thing was the commitment we were making to each other, not the flowers or the cake or the perfect dress. As much as the wedding itself seemed like a monumental event, it was just a small piece of the larger picture of our lives together. As the wedding planning continued, I also began to reflect more deeply on my own relationships with the rest of the family. The rift with Daniela remained, but I was beginning to understand that my peace didn't depend on her actions. It wasn't easy. There were days when I found myself frustrated and hurt by her continued absence from our lives, but I was starting to accept that I couldn't control her choices. What I could control was how I responded, and I was choosing to focus on the positive relationships in my life. The holiday season had been a turning point. It was the first time in years that we had spent meaningful time together without the constant backdrop of conflict. Joe, Matt, and even Sam had all been there, celebrating the season with me, and I realized how much of my strength came from these bonds. Despite everything we had been through, despite the years of hurt and distance, we were still here. We were still family, and that meant more than anything. The process of planning a wedding, navigating family drama, and dealing with my own emotional baggage was exhausting, but it was also transformative. It forced me to reevaluate what truly mattered in life: love, connection, and the courage to face both the past and the future with grace. As I moved forward, I knew that the road ahead would not always be easy, but I also knew that it would be worth it. And so, as the year unfolded, I took each step with a new sense of purpose. The challenges weren't gone, but I was stronger, more resolute, and more prepared to face whatever lay ahead. There was healing in the air, slow but steady, like the tender growth of a seed finally breaking through the soil. And though the future was uncertain, for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the journey we were all on together. As the months rolled on, the world seemed to continue moving forward with a sense of inevitable momentum, each of us carrying our own burdens, hopes, and dreams. For the most part, the family had found a delicate balance as we each navigated our personal journeys and tried to avoid the darker shadows that had once loomed over us. But no matter how much we had worked on healing, the presence of our mother, our estranged mother, still lingered, like a ghost haunting the corners of our lives. She had always been the unpredictable force in our family, the one whose moods could shift like the weather, and whose actions had the potential to wreak havoc. For years, we had tried to distance ourselves from her toxic influence, setting boundaries and working to protect ourselves. Yet, in the back of my mind, I knew that we had never truly been free of her. Despite all our best efforts, there was always the possibility that she would re-enter our lives with a destructive vengeance, and none of us were truly prepared for what that might mean. In the weeks leading up to our wedding, there had been whispers of her trying to worm her way back into the family's good graces. Her calls, once infrequent, had grown more insistent. At first, I had dismissed them, choosing to remain resolute in my decision to keep her out of my life. But as the wedding day drew nearer, the pressure grew. She knew that Joe and Anna's adoption had been the catalyst for some of the most difficult decisions we had made as a family, and she was determined to somehow insert herself into the situation. One night, I received a call from my father. His voice was shaking, strained in a way I had never heard before. "It's your mother," he said. She's in the hospital." The words barely registered at first, but as he explained further, it became clear that she had been involved in a serious accident. We didn't know the full details, but it appeared to be a result of her reckless driving. She had crashed her car late at night after a drinking binge. Despite the severity of the crash, it wasn't the injuries that would claim her life. It was something far more insidious. At the hospital, I was confronted with the broken woman who had once been the center of our universe. The woman I had tried so desperately to escape from. Her face was swollen, bruised, her breathing shallow. She was unconscious, her life hanging by a thread. The doctors said she was stable, but the damage was severe, too severe for her to ever fully recover. Her liver was damaged beyond repair, and the doctors were unsure how long she had left. It was in that sterile hospital room that the full weight of her actions and the pain she had inflicted on all of us hit me with a force I hadn't anticipated. My emotions were a mess: rage, sorrow, guilt, and an overwhelming sense of helplessness. There she was, this woman who had failed us all in every conceivable way, now lying in a hospital bed, her life fading before our eyes. For all the anger I had carried, there was a part of me that was horrified by the idea of her suffering, and yet another part that felt a strange sense of justice. Was this the end she deserved? Would it be the peace we had all longed for? For Sam, this moment brought a flood of unresolved feelings. He had spent his entire life trying to gain her approval, only to be abandoned when he needed her most. Now, he was faced with a woman who had caused so much pain, who had never truly cared for him, but who he still felt an obligation to care for. The complexity of his emotions was overwhelming, and watching him struggle to reconcile his feelings only deepened the tragedy of the situation. The days that followed were a blur of tense hospital visits, family discussions, and painful decisions. Despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to visit her right away. I had spent so many years distancing myself, trying to heal, trying to live without the weight of her toxicity. I had built a life for myself, one that I had finally found peace in. I couldn't let her back in. Not now, not ever. But one evening, as I sat in my apartment, alone, the phone rang. It was my father again. "She's asking for you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She says she needs to speak to you, before it's too late." I was torn. The idea of seeing her, of confronting her at the end of her life, filled me with dread. But deep down, I knew that for my own peace of mind, I had to face her one last time. This was my final chance to close the door that had been open far too long. When I entered her hospital room, the air was thick with unspoken tension. She lay there, frail and fragile, her once proud and defiant posture now reduced to a broken and vulnerable figure. She looked older than I had remembered, worn, defeated. Her once bright eyes now seemed dull, clouded with regret. There was no trace of the manipulative force she had been in her prime. It was as if time, the same force that had ravaged her body, had stripped away everything that had once made her dangerous. She opened her eyes slowly, almost hesitantly, and when she saw me, her lips curled into a faint, pained smile. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I should have done better for you. For all of you." The words were so simple, yet they cut through me like a knife. I had spent so much of my life waiting for an apology, hoping for a recognition of the damage she had caused. But hearing it now, at this moment, felt too little, too late. She was so far gone, and the damage had already been done. "Why now?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Why after all these years?" She closed her eyes briefly, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I don't know. I was lost. I was so lost in my own pain. I didn't know how to love, how to be there for you. I never meant to hurt you." It was an answer that didn't quite satisfy me, but I nodded nonetheless. I had always yearned for this moment, but now that it was here, I realized it didn't bring the closure I thought it would. There was no magic in her words, no final redemption. She had lived a life defined by mistakes, and now she would die with them. The next morning, the phone rang again. This time, it was to tell us that she had passed. It wasn't a sudden death. Her body had simply given up, as broken as her spirit had been for so long. Her passing was quiet, peaceful, and in a strange way, that was the most fitting end for her. It was as if her life had come full circle, from chaos to a final, unresolved silence. We gathered together to mourn her, though it was more of a release than a loss. The family, despite everything, came together in the face of her death, finally acknowledging that she was no longer part of our lives. Her passing marked the end of an era, one that was fraught with pain, manipulation, and neglect. For all the years of suffering, we were free. In the months that followed, there was a quiet sense of healing among us. For Sam, it was the beginning of a new chapter. He found peace in knowing that her toxicity would no longer affect him. For Joe and Anna, their focus shifted to the life they were building with their new daughter, free from the shadows of the past. As for me, I moved forward with the wedding, knowing that the final chapter had been written. I had found my peace, not in the apology I had once sought, but in the act of letting go. The tragic end of the woman who had once held so much power over us was a reminder that some things, no matter how much we try to change them, will always be beyond our control. But now, we had the chance to build a future defined not by her mistakes, but by our own choices. And that was the legacy we would carry forward. Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit notification bell to stay updated.